Hey everybody, my name is Corbin McGee, and this is my second installment of the Sunday special Ben Shapiro reviews. The first one I did was yesterday. We took a dive into Joe Rogan's interview, which aired yesterday. I thought it would be appropriate to give a follow-up that day of. But now we're going to go back and do Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, and I think Dr. Drew, I think, was on the third one, so we'll be up to date for next week. So let's get started, all right? This hour, the hour of the Peterson interview, well, it has about 900,000 views on YouTube right now, and it is a fucking it is a extremely deep and complicated conversation I was actually having a hard time following it. And I've read Jordan Peterson's work. I've read Shapiro's work. I listen to Shapiro a lot. I know a lot about Peterson, and this one was kind of hard to follow. So I'm going to try to give you guys a brief summary of what they talked about, a couple intakes my opinions a little bit, and we'll take out a few nuggets. So so what was interesting about the whole debate is that for the first time since I started following Shapiro, I noticed, well, normally he doesn't do interviews back and forth with people. He basically, he gives his Daily Wire show every day and doesn't do a lot of interviewing. So, but this time around, this was the first time I ever saw him, it seemed a little bit confused whenever Peterson was kind of going deep into some of the subjects. We'll get to that a little bit later. So first he starts out with basically the introduction, talking about how 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote for Chaos is now one of the top selling books in the world. I mean, everybody is eating that thing up. So, which is good. Kudos to my man JBP. I'm happy to see someone like him has some skin in the game, and I hope more people come out of the woodwork and join him in this in what he's trying to do, at least. And let's see. The first, obviously, Shapiro, you know how he likes to talk about the left and how horrible the left is, and I'm on the left myself, but I'm very well aware of our shortcomings. But it is an obsession of Shapiro to talk about the left. So he starts the first, well, and also with Peterson as well. I mean, his shtick on postmodernism is just being replayed over and over again, millions and millions of times over in YouTube, which I agree with him on a lot of the concepts, which I disagree him on some. But when the left takes it a little too far, I think we can all agree on that one. So the first part of the discussion, Shapiro asks, why does the left hate you? Which I actually am fascinated by this, because I'm on the left, and I know some of my guys, some of my people, they hate Peterson. They can't stand him. They can't stand what he stands for. And I haven't really got a definitive answer. I mean, I have my opinions why, but Peterson basically just repeats what he's been saying for the last year since he started to blow up in Canada with the whole enforced speech laws up in the Ottawa Parliament, I guess, that debate they were having. So he basically talks about how the left is I took a lot of notes here, is only capable of looking at the world through group identity, and if somebody disagrees with them, then what they do is they attack not them as an individual, they talk to them as they attack their immutable characteristics. Okay, but it only works with straight white men, apparently, because they won't attack somebody based on their immutable characteristics if they're part of that group that they represent, I guess. However, if you're a straight white male and you disagree with whatever the left dogma is at any time, then what they do is they attack you as that. As we saw with the Michael Eric Dyson debates, where he called him an angry white man, which was just hilarious, which was really funny to watch. And Stephen Fry's reaction at the end, where he called him a huckster and a snake oil salesman, was just priceless. I loved it. But those guys like Michael Eric Dyson, Joy Reid, Al Sharpton, those guys, that's their go-to. Whenever they feel back into a corner, that's what they come at you with. I mean, they don't want to talk about the ideas and the philosophies, but no, let's hit him where things that he can't change, right? So Then Peterson made a good point. He said, I get tens of thousands of letters from people, and I get, I have people stop me on the street talking about how my book helped them and how my lectures have helped them become better people. And he deals with people who are suicidal, alcoholics, drug addicts, and he tells a heartening story about this Latino man that restored relationships with his father, and he brought the father out of the car and he talked to him, and he said, you really gave me direction, and I got my room clean, and he made the joke. And if you read the book, or even like watch any of his lectures or talks, he discusses the concept of cleaning your room first, and then fixing it with things around you, fixing your environment. Excuse me, I have allergies. So he talks about, so if the left really wants to demonize me for helping people and helping thousands of people, thousands of men, better themselves and better their lives, then I'm sorry. Then that's your problem. And what's also too is interesting. A lot of interviewers talk about how Peterson is this poster child for like the alt-right, and he is, angry white men are the ones that are gravitating towards them. And I don't see that, because if you look at the comment section, if you look at a lot and people that are at one of his events, and they showed this, I mean, there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different people, a lot of women, a lot of people are in there, a lot of people are interested in what he has to say. And I read his work and I like his work, and I'm a white guy, and I don't see the connection there. I don't see the connection. I think it's a book for people, and it's a book about the values, the ideals of enlightenment, and it's about getting your stuff together, and it's about being able to having a purpose in your life. I don't think that's a racial thing. But what's interesting is that the left, what they talk about, my people, that's what they gravitate towards, because that's all they can get them on, which in reality I don't think that's actually true. So anyways, I'm going to make a video about why people hate Jordan Peterson. Too, I got to do a little more research first. So, we're 7 minutes. We're not even close to being done. So we're going to kind of go through here. So what he also talks about, when he says that, and another thing too about why the left hates him is because of, he talks about personal responsibility, and you got to take control of your life, which is not what. If you went to undergraduate and you were in the humanities, which I did, and you went to graduate school for the humanities, which I did, they don't talk about that. They talk about system problems, system oppression, and how we can change the system. But they never, ever, ever talk about the individual. When they talk about foreign aid, and we talk about, I had an international foreign aid class where all we did was talk about the problems with the system. They never, ever discussed the fact that the leaders of the countries that you send foreign aid to steal the money, and it goes into the hands of the oligarchs. They never talked about that. They talked about the problems with systematic oppression of the whatever. So anyways, then expectedly they get into the gender problem, gender differences, which obviously if you know Shapiro and you know Peterson, you know that is a hot topic for them. However, I don't like Shapiro's take on it, because I feel like Shapiro is doing it out of ideology, which I have a hard time wrapping my hands around, because I know you're doing it from a right-wing perspective. However, with Peterson, he's doing it more from a literature and medical and scientific perspective, which I respect. And he also says later on in the interview, if you want to know whether something's fact or fiction, see if it's a fact despite of that person's ideology, which I think is very interesting. And he talks about the Big Five model and how you can map the Big Five personality model: openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, extroversion, and agreeableness, and how you can map those. If you sum them up and map them across the genders, you can hit male and female accuracy with 75%, which is not perfect, but it also indicates that there are significant differences. There are more similarities than there are differences, but there are differences. And he talks about, okay, well, then you can say they're either biological or you can say they're socioculture. Now, what he discusses in his interview is that the way to figure out if they're biological or sociocultural is you do a study. So what you do is you take all the countries, say the top 50 countries in the world, right? And you figure out and you you rank them based on egalitarian policies and social policies, right? And at the top of those countries are the Scandinavian countries, which he discusses a lot throughout his lectures and his stuff, and especially when he talks with feminists on national television, like Kathy Newman, for example, who's the worst. And he says that what you do is, okay, you take the most egalitarian societies, okay, and then you check to see, in terms of the differences, do they amplify or do they start to even out? And what they found in Scandinavian countries, and mostly in the Western world, where the differences actually go in the opposite direction, and the differences between male and female actually amplify whenever in the more egalitarian societies. So, what he's saying that, given that, you can say that is a case against biology. This is a case against the socio-cultural factors. And it's not a social construct, and it's actually biological. So, I'm not taking a side on that one. I think it's a little more complicated, but I'm just relaying the message that I got from that talk. Okay, so, and which I love when he talked about academia, because I just came from academia, and I just spent 2 years getting my master's degree in public administration, and I can say with certainty, I've watched activists parading as professors and journalists, specifically manipulate data on how to push an ideology. And we actually had a class on how to manipulate data to push an ideology, right? We had a class on it. So, and he states that if you want to really dig into the data and you want to look at the science versus the social constructionist science, the people who are pushing that ideology, all their citations come from within their group, where there's zero scientific citations, zero, whenever you read sociology papers or whenever you read the gender studies papers. But in terms of the scientific data, thousands and thousands and thousands of citations over the last 30 years. So the empirical data is extremely, in the side of biological. Anyways, not to say that there's not similarities, of course not, but we have to recognize that there are differences. Now, the conversation then from that point forward gets extremely deep and extremely kind of tough to follow. So I'm going to try to do it and sum it up as best as possible. And if you want to correct me and if you have a better way of translating it for me, then that is fine. So what they do is they basically they break into the Enlightenment. They say, like, why is there such a gap? Why is there such a gap between collectivism and... Oh, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. Why is there such a gap between collectivism and individualism? And Peterson breaks down, he talks about the Enlightenment, on how what we're trying to do is actually throw the natural structural hierarchy that has been implicit and innate in basically society, when humans and animals and everything, we're trying to break that natural structural hierarchy and throw it out. That's what the postmodernist movement is, and it's basically anti-enlightenment. That is basically what that is. And he says that the enlightenment wasn't exactly to establish that structure, because that structure has always been there. That there's some people up here and there's a lot of people down here. It's usually about 20-80. Right? And he talks about the archetypal figures of heroes, people that we look up to emulate the behavior in order to become successful, or in order to maximize our efficiency or maximize our success within that structure. So what the Enlightenment did is the Enlightenment brought forward rules, number one, rules within that structure, and the most important part that it brought out was mapping. So what Peterson's saying is that what we've been doing since the Enlightenment period is that we've been mapping our success, and we've been mapping what works and what doesn't work. Okay? And up until that point, people were just kind of, living by the 10 Commandments and trying to figure things out. And there wasn't really a set of rules, and there wasn't maps that can allow you to have access to how to do a certain thing or how to thrive in this certain hierarchical structure. Okay, and so that was one of the most interesting things I heard about the entire debate. It wasn't a debate; it was more of a discussion. It was in terms of mapping, and then I realized that Peterson also wrote a book called The Maps of Meaning. I think the meanings of maps of meaning, and he basically breaks down that our entire existence can be mapped out, is mapped out, and has been mapped out. But when talking about the natural hierarchy, I mean, if you read his book, I think it's chapter 1, when he talks about the lobsters, and he talks about how there are hierarchical structures in biology in every single aspect in the world. There's systems in place that have been date back millions of years, that where there are, there's a lot of people at the bottom and there's actually a lot of people at the top. And what his biggest fear is that in the 20th century, we try to upset that balance through communism and socialism, and the results were absolutely dire. And that is what he said, and that it's been done, it's what has been done, but in the extreme case, but socialism always turns into communism, and we saw what happened in the Great Leap Forward with Mao, and in the Soviet Union. And I mean, it's a little extreme for me, but he, as Bill Maher put it, it's like a slow-moving coup, but in the opposite direction. So they talk about that, and they discuss about what the left wants. They want to strip the structures down from the beginning, those natural structures that he maps out, and he says that's their goal. In order to do that, you need to tear down what we established in the Enlightenment, and you see that actually in gender studies, and you see that actually in humanities and social sciences. You see that in the data, and you see that in the literature. And it talks about breaking down of those structures and breaking down of those, as they call them, barriers. But, I mean, yes, can we change things in the culture? Of course can we change things in the culture, but can you change things naturally and force it on people with a gun, which we tried to do in the Soviet Union? It's not going to work. It's not good. And even within the Soviet Union, you had significant hierarchies, and you had people who all sat at the top and basically acquired resources up to the top, while the rest of the people were poor, and there were rich people at the top. Yeah, not rich with money, but rich with resources. So, the Soviet Union wasn't as glorious as people make it out to be. So, where are we with that? So, 17 minutes. Yeah, I try to keep it under 20 for you guys. And then they break into, and then they talk about this is where they started to really lose me, and I could see, well, Ben, I think Ben was having a hard time following at one point. It just seemed like it on his face, but then they started about the truth in the moral sphere, and they talk about bad, good, and evil. And once again, Peterson relies back on the mapping. He's like, we've mapped it out, and we know what makes a good person, and we mapped it out, and we know what is a bad person. You know what the bad person is. You could see it in the writings of people who commit mass murders and mass atrocities. You know what that map is. You know what that is. And he looks at it from Christ and Satan, because he's a religious person. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, I wouldn't say opposite side of the spectrum, but from a different viewpoint, Ben Shapiro talks about the Aristotelian approach, about it's about reason and about logic. And if you make a decision using reason based off of the laws of the embedded universe, which is an Aristotelian approach, that is what makes it a good moral decision, if you do it through reason. They go a little bit deeper, but I'll be honest with you, philosophy and religion is not my strong suit. I had a hard time following it, just to be honest. So you're going to have to really dig your heels in and really pay attention for this one, because it's a roller coaster. It's an excellent discussion, but Peterson does like to, he goes on his rants and stuff, and it just you realize how much you haven't read and how behind you are. You want to talk about hierarchical structures in terms of intelligence and actual knowledge of history and psychology. Like, he's coming from a pretty high place. I mean, whether you agree with him or you disagree, that's up to you. I'm a big fan. I know some people are crazy. I'm not crazy about him, but I think it's refreshing to have those discussions. Because, I mean, I spent basically 15 years of my life within that liberal bubble, and he's kind of challenging all the stuff that I learned in my graduate degree and my undergraduate. So that's why I'm making these videos, and that's why I'm watching these. That's why I'm fascinated with this subject. So to wrap up, and I'm gonna wrap up with Peterson kind of closed with, and they started talking. They brought it all the way back full circle to the left, and Shapiro said, "Are you angry? Why are you so angry?" And Peterson said, "I'm not angry. I'm appalled by the left. I'm appalled by by academia." Okay, and I think a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are pissed at that shit, and they've kind of had enough. That's why you're seeing a lot of people move into the center. That's why you see these guys like Peterson and, you know, Sam Harris, Majid Nawaz, like these guys, Ariane Hirsi Ali, that's Shapiro, Crowder, that group of people are, you know, are taking the internet by storm. And good. I think we should go along for the run. I think they need to be taken seriously. So to wrap up, Peterson really emphasizes one of the main themes in his book is that you got to have meaning. And if your life doesn't have meaning, then it's going to be hell. And he says that, well, he doesn't say in those exact words, but he said that whenever you have meaning in your life and in your purpose, then what that does is that'll help you weather the storms and weather the catastrophes that are imminent in life, because life is a tragedy. And that's a little dark, but he makes a point. You know, life is hard. It's supposed to be. And having meaning in your life will help you get through those tough times. And that's how he wraps it up. And it was a great discussion. And he makes a really good point about society. He said the reason why you need to clean your room is because every time you make a mistake, right, you get yourself closer to hell. And he says hell because if everybody's making mistakes, it's a collective, right? Everybody's making mistakes, and then the society kind of collapses and gets closer to hell. And then because you know how dark he is, and then he kind of talks about it's a reference to Nazi Germany, which he loves to finish that. Okay, so that's my review. I think it was a great discussion. It was excellent. And if you're interested, I mean, I know it's a little long, 22 minutes. The whole discussion's an hour, but it is deep, and I would really like to hear what you think. And if you like what you hear, come back, see me again. I'm gonna do Ruben. I'm gonna do Ruben next. I just did Rogan. Just finished this up, and I got a couple other videos about Candace Owens that I want to talk about. And I got you know, we're gonna discuss a little more about these the phenomenon of the IDWs. So, all right, have a good one.